Hi, and welcome to tonight's live History Bites. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoy tonight's one. So, today, following on from last week, we are looking at mythical monsters. Yes, those crazy creatures that the heroes from last week's stories take on. So, the monsters are a staple component of the heroic story. There's always a monster to take on. Heracles takes on 12 in accordance to his labours, Perseus takes one. Monsters are everywhere. Some of them are humanoid in appearance, such as the Cyclops, the giants with the one eye. Others are more animal in appearance, if you think of the fire-breathing bull that Hercules takes on. And some of them, like the Hydra, the Chimera, have a purely fantasy-based origin. We don't know what on earth they were supposed to be based on, but they existed in the mythology. What we have to remember when we're looking at the mythological monsters is that most, if not all, of the mythology that we have comes about as a way of explaining the world around us. So we're looking at clouds, we're looking at thunderstorms, we're looking at raging seas, and wondering what on earth causes this kind of thing. For instance, if it's the first time you've ever seen a tidal wave, you're not going to know that Earth's gravitational pull or things made that. You could think it was a huge sea monster. So, what does that sea monster look like? How do you explain the shipwreck that happened? It's all different ways of explaining things. So, obviously, what our monsters represent in mythology are some aspects of nature or some unexplainable thing. Obviously, we don't have the same mindset as the ancients who created the mythology, so we're probably never going to know entirely what they were getting at with each monster. But what they have given us are some excellent stories. Now, the best known mythological monsters that we have come from ancient Greece. I'm pretty sure everybody must have heard of Medusa, the Gorgon, with the hair of snakes and the gaze that could turn men to stone. She's a very popular one. Again, there's the Hydra, Heracles' Hydra, with its heads that keep growing as he cuts them off. There's also the Cyclops, taken on by Odysseus in the Odyssey. There are centaurs, which also enjoyed a brief resurgence in Harry Potter. You may remember one or two of them appeared in there. So our monsters got a new lease of life. And the monsters are there for the heroes to fight. They're there for them to defeat and be heroic about. But they're enjoyable stories. What we have as we move further away is that there are monsters that cross the globe, different things that appear everywhere. So one of those is called a chimera. Now, chimeras appear differently in various different cultures. It's usually a composite animal, so it's made up of at minimum 2 or up to 9 different creatures. And they are fearsome. They are simply a way of creating some strange, unexplainable monster. It may be that somebody saw an elephant once and didn't know what it was, so assumed it was some kind of giraffe with a snake attached or something similar. Anyhow, the chimera is everywhere. The Etruscans have one. They're the people who lived in Italy before the Romans. Their version of it is comprised of a lion, a goat, and a snake. The most part of it is a lion with a lion's head. Out of its back sticks the head and front legs of a goat, and its tail is a snake. All of them can scratch, bite, and control parts of the animal. It's a very strange composite. The Hittite version, so the Hittites come from Anatolia, which is part of modern-day Turkey. Their version is similar, a lion's body, but it has a human head, a little bit like the Egyptian Sphinx. Not very much like it in the mythology, though, a much more evil creature. Other versions have wings, they can fly. Other different varieties of it can breathe fire. It's a very, very strange beast that we find all over the world, and it has various different names everywhere. A lot of the Indian mythology, for instance, has various types of chimeras as its mythical monsters. There are loads and loads of them. Another thing that we find that's all over the world is the idea of dragons and snakes. They're either dragons or dragon-esque things, and they appear all over the world. Obviously, I'm sure you've all seen the Chinese dragons at Chinese New Year. An early Chinese mythology suggests that the northern lights in the sky were in fact dragons flying around and breathing their fire. So maybe they're not so much monsters as beautiful things, but in terms of lumping strange creatures together, we could call them monsters for now. We also have much more monstrous types of dragons in the UK mythology. For instance, our George and Dragon myth. George slays the dragon. It's the last dragon in England. Apparently, they'd wandered around freely until George killed off the last one. You also see it in the Viking mythology. Anyone who studied the Viking longboats knows that it's the dragon prow that sits on the front. We see dragons there. The Midgard serpent that encircles the world is also part of the dragon mythology. It's more of a snake, but it still falls into this dragon-esque type of monster. The Midgard serpent being one of the children of Loki that will eventually bring about Ragnarok and the fall of the gods. We also have a dragon at the end of the story of Beowulf. Once he's dealt with Grendel and Grendel's mother and he becomes king for a while, he eventually ends up having to deal with a dragon. So dragons appear everywhere. But where does this ubiquitousness of dragons come from? Could it possibly be that we find them all across the world because we find dinosaur bones all across the world? Is it possible that our ancient people creating the mythologies came across dinosaur bones, and while they didn't figure out dinosaurs, they figured out something broadly similar, such as the dragons? It's possible, maybe, though we don't know. Dragons have been ever enduring, though. We find them in a lot of our mythology stories today. For instance, tonight the TV series Game of Thrones is finishing tonight in America, I believe, and they have brought dragons right back into the fore. So we have dragons appearing in a lot of our modern mythology. There's also the highly successful How to Train Your Dragon series, which is much cuter versions of dragons, but still dragons in a Viking mythology sort of setting. If you've seen the last one, it also explains perfectly well how dragons become part of the Viking mythology, which is fantastic. We also have another set of monster mythology that's coming to the fore in our modern cinema. You may have seen a couple of Godzilla films about recently. I think there's another one due forward. We're starting to recreate the whole Godzilla mythos, so more of these mythical monsters, Godzilla, Mothra, King Kong becomes a part of this world. But there is arguably a much more successful modern day mythology that was created by H.P. Lovecraft. He created this world of the Ancient Ones, of which Cthulhu the Dread is probably his most famous and enduring creation. Cthulhu being such an enigmatic monster that various people have expanded his theology and created whole new universes for Cthulhu the monster, a lot of which are very akin to the earlier Greek stories of myths, monsters, and heroes trying to take them on. Anyhow, that's going to be everything for tonight on the mythological monsters. I hope I managed to cover some interesting things for you. Next week, we'll be looking at the trickster gods and goddesses of the world. If you like the page, please like and subscribe to carry on keeping up with what we're doing here. Thank you, everybody, and good night.